on Friday night, we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. When you feel it's hopeless, when you think that you're lost, oh, I will take your hand and we'll rise up from the dust. Oh, here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started, shall we?
Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We
Okay, good evening. Time for our third reading out of Trust Me, I'm Lying, Confessions of a Media Manipulator. Been reading like 2 articles or 2 chapters, whatever you want to call them. These seem a little bit more like articles than chapters. But anyway, 2 a night, so we're on 5th and 6th ones. And what do we got tonight? So, he was talking about the tactics of um, of manipulating, and how many tactics were there? I don't remember, but the first one was the art of the bribe. And this one is tactic 2, tell them what they want to hear. And we start off with a quote, as we have before. Even though credibility is all you have to sell, it's not enough anymore. Credibility is not working as a business model. Credibility of journalism is at an all-time low anyway. By Kelly McBride from Poynter Institute. All right. The problem of journalism, says Edward J. Epstein in his book Between Fact and Fiction, is simple. Journalists are rarely in a position to establish the truth of an issue themselves, since they didn't witness it personally. They are, quote, entirely dependent on self-interested sources, end quote, to supply their facts. Every part of the news-making process is defined by this relationship. Everything is colored by this reality. Who are these self-interested sources? Well, anyone selling a product, a message, or an agenda. People like me. When the New York Times publishes leaked documents, there is an implicit understanding that they have at least attempted to verify their validity. The same goes for the identity of the source who gave it to them. Anyone anonymous means something else entirely, or online anonymous means something else entirely. Quotes and tips are drawn from unsolicited, untraced emails or angry comments pulled from comment sections or sent in by people who have something to gain from it. I know because I have been this kind of source dozens of times, and it was never for anything important. My identity is never verified. Today, the online driven news cycle is going a million miles a minute in a million directions. The New York Times may still try to verify their sources, but it hardly matters because no one else does. This creates endless opportunities for people like me to slip in and twist things to my liking. As Epstein said, the discrepancy between what actually happened and the version of what happened provided by sources is an enormous gray area. Of all such areas, it's where I have the most fun and direct influence. The deliberate leak. Once during a lawsuit, I needed to get some information into the public discussion of it. So I dashed off a fake internal memo explaining the company's position, printed it out, scanned it, and sent the file to a bunch of blogs as if I were an employee leaking a, quote, memo we just got from our boss, end quote. The same bloggers who were uninterested in the facts when I informed them directly gladly put up exclusive and leaked posts about it. They could tell my side of the story because I told it to them in words they wanted to hear. More people saw it than ever would have had I issued an official statement. I once had a client who had been subjected to a complete hit job of a piece by a major newspaper. The writer of the article had actually been running their own hater blog about the company they then objectively reported on. When the client complained to the writer's editor, the editor shrugged it off. To reply, I simply had the client write a long email to his staff explaining what happened and laying out the complete and embarrassing case against the article. Then we forwarded that email to a media reporter at a different outlet who published it in full. The email read well and was quite damning, because it had been written for the express purpose of being made public. The original outlet had no choice but to respond, and will hopefully think twice about a hatchet job like that in the future. Another time I had some promotional images for a Halloween campaign I also couldn't use because of copyright concerns. I still wanted them seen, so I had one of my employees email them to Jezebel and Gawker and write, quote, I shouldn't be doing this, but I found some secret images on the American Apparel server, and here they are, end quote. The post based on this lie did 90,000 views. The writer wrote back a helpful tip. No need to leak me info from your company email address. You might get caught. I thought, but how else could she be sure they were real? It was funny at the time. Then a few months later, a U.S. congressman allegedly exchanged emails with a girl on Craigslist and sent her a shirtless photo of himself. The girl forwarded this photo and the incriminating email correspondence that supposedly occurred along with it to Gawker, which owns Jezebel. Gawker posted it, and the congressman immediately resigned. Knowing now that an anonymous tip to Gawker had the power to end the career of a U.S. congressman took took a little the fun out of it for me. Scratch that. Now my personal knowledge of how sourcing works online genuinely scares me. Press Release 2.0. When I first started in PR, all of the leading web gurus were proclaiming the death of the press release. Good riddance, I thought. Journalists should care too much about what they write to churn out articles and posts based on press releases. I could not have been more wrong. Before long, I came to see the truth. Blogs love press releases. It does every part of their job for them. The material is already written, the angle laid out, the subject newsworthy, and since it comes from an official newswire, they can blame everyone else if the story turns out to be wrong. As a 2010 study by Pew Research Center's Project for Excellence in Journalism found, quote, as news is posted faster, often with little enterprise reporting added, the official version of events is becoming more important. We found official press releases often appear word for word in first accounts of events, though often not noted as such. End quote. So I started putting out press releases all the time. Open a new store, put out a press release. Launch a new product, put out a press release. Launch a new color of a new product, press release. A blogger might pick it up, and even if no outlets do, press releases through services like PR Web are deliberately search engine optimized to show up well in Google results indefinitely. Most important, investing sites like Google Finance, CNN Money, Yahoo Finance, and Motley Fool all automatically syndicate the major release wires. If you're a public company with a stock symbol, the good news in any release you put out shows up right in front of your most important audience, stockholders. Minutes after you put it out, it's right there on the company's stock page in the recent news section, eagerly being read by investors and traders. Okay, how's our sound doing? Yep. Okay. I quickly learned that not everyone saw this as harmless, low-hanging media fruit. My instinct is not illegal profit, but for those who have it, blogs' blind faith in press releases presents opportunities. It did for New York stockbroker Lambros Ballas. He was charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission for issuing fake online press releases about the stocks of companies like Google, Disney, and Microsoft and seeding them on blogs and finance forums. On the fake news of an acquisition offer from Microsoft, shares of local.com jumped 75% in one day, after which he and other traders dumped all their shares and moved on to pumping other stocks on fake news. In Austin, a man named Christopher French was fined $40,000 by the SEC for pumping up stocks via articles on seekingalpha.com under fake names. The fake names weren't the problem. The problem was that he was paid at least $60,000 by the companies to write those articles. When I later saw reports of a man who planned to set off explosive devices at Target so he could buy their stock at a discount and profit from the eventual rebound, I thought, man, somebody should have told this guy there is a much, much easier way to do that. It's stunning how much news is now driven by such releases, reputable or otherwise. A LexisNexis search of major newspapers for the words in a press release, quote unquote, brings back so many results that the service actually attempts to warn you against trying saying, quote, this search has been interrupted because it will return more than 3,000 results. If you continue with this if you continue if you continue with this search, it may take more time to return this information, end quote. Sorry, stumbling through that one. Same goes for the phrases announced today and told reporters. In other words, newspapers depended on marketing spam literally too many times to count in the last year. A Google blog search for quote unquote said in a press release, meaning they quoted directly from a release, brings back 307,000 results for the same period as the LexisNexis search and more than 4 million for all time. Announced today brings up more than 32,000 articles for a single week. If you get specific, an internal search of TechCrunch brings up more than 5,000 articles using announced today and 7,000 attributed citations to press releases. This pales in comparison to the Huffington Post, whose bloggers have written the words announced today more than 50,000 times and cited press releases more than 200,000 times. And of course, there's also TalkingPointsMemo.com, whose name unintentionally reveals that most blogs and newspapers carelessly pass on to their readers pre-written talking points from the powers that be. Anyone can now be that power. Anyone can give blogs their talking points. To call it a seller's market is an understatement, but it's the only thing I can think of that comes close to describing a medium in which dominant personalities like tech blogger Robert Scoble can nostalgically repost things on his Google Plus account like the original pitch for publicity that the iPad startup Flipboard had sent him. It's a great time to be a media manipulator when your marks actually love receiving PR pitches, not even needing to be the source. Bloggers are under incredible pressure to produce, leaving little time for research or verification, let alone for speaking to sources. In some cases, the story they are chasing is so crazy that they don't want to risk doing research because the whole facade could collapse. In my experience, bloggers operate by some general rules of thumb. If a source can't be contacted by email, they probably can't be a source. I've talked to bloggers on the phone only a few times, ever, but thousands of times over email. If background information isn't publicly or easily available, it probably can't be included. Writers are at the mercy of official sources such as press releases, spokesmen, government officials, and media kits. And these are for the instances when they even bother to check anything. Most important, they're at the mercy of Wikipedia because that's where they do their research. Too bad people like me manipulate that too. Nothing illustrates this better than the story of a man who, as a joke, changed the name of comedian and actor Russell Brand's mother on Wikipedia from Barbara to Juliet. When Brand took his mother as his date to the Academy Awards shortly after the Los Angeles Times ran the online headline over their picture, Russell Brand and his mother Juliet Brand. I remember sitting on the couch at Tucker Max's house on January, when something occurred to me about his then on and off again bestseller, Hey Tucker, did you notice your book made the New York Times? Oh, sorry. Quote, Hey Tucker, did you notice your book made the New York Times list in 2007, 2006? Jesus, I don't know why I'm stumbling so much tonight. Sorry. Quote, Hey Tucker, did you notice your book made the New York Times list in 2006, 2007, and 2008? End quote. Meaning the book had appeared on the list at least once in all 3 years, but not continuously. So I typed it up, sourced it, and added it to Wikipedia, delineating each year. Not long after I posted it, a journalist cribbed my research and did us the big favor of having poor reading comprehension. He wrote, quote, Tucker Max's book has spent over 3 years on the New York Times bestseller list, end quote. Then we took this and doubled up our citation on Wikipedia to use this new, more generous interpretation. This is a cycle I have watched speed up, but also descend into outright plagiarism. I can't divulge the specifics, but I commonly see uniquely worded or selectively edited facts that paid editors inserted into Wikipedia show up later in major newspapers and blogs with the exact same wording. You'll have to trust me on when and where. Wikipedia acts as a certifier of basic information for many people, including reporters. Even a subtle influence over the way that Wikipedia frames an issue, such as criminal charges, a controversial campaign, a lawsuit, or even a critical reception, can have a major impact on the way bloggers write about it. It is the difference between, quote, so and so released their second album in 2011, end quote, and, quote, so and so's first album was followed by the multi platinum and critically lauded hit, end quote. You change the descriptors on Wikipedia, and reporters and readers change their descriptors down the road. A complete overhaul of one high profile starlet's Wikipedia page was once followed less than a week later by a 6-page spread in a big tabloid that so obviously used our positive and flattering language from Wikipedia that I was almost scared it would be its own scandal. It's why you have to control your page. Otherwise, you risk putting yourself in the awkward position a friend found himself in when profiled by a reporter at a national newspaper who asked, quote, so according to Wikipedia, you're a failed screenwriter. Is that true? End quote. This is a long article for Gee, mini Christmas. Okay. Yeah, this one's pretty dang long tonight. How long is this next one? Okay, it's shorter. All right. Well, we'll plow through both of them. All right. So, getting on to the next section. Trust me, I'm an expert. It's not a stretch to convince anyone that it's easy to become a source for blogs. Cracking the mainstream media is much harder, right? Nope. There's actually a tool designed expressly for this purpose. As I mentioned in the preface, there is a site called HARO, H-A-R-O, Help a Reporter Out, founded by PR man Peter Shankman, that connects hundreds of self-interested sources, quote unquote, to willing reporters every day. It is the de facto sourcing and lead factory for journalists and publicists. According to the site, nearly 30,000 members of the media have used HARO sources, including the New York Times, the Associated Press, the Huffington Post, and everyone in between. What did these experts get out of offering their services? Free publicity, of course. In fact, free publicity is HARO's tagline. I've used it myself to con reporters from ABC News to Reuters to the Today Show, and yes, even the vaunted New York Times. Sometimes I don't even do it myself. I just have an assistant pretend to be me over email or on the phone. The fact that my eyes light up when I think of how to use HARO's services to benefit myself and my clients should be illustrative. If I was tasked with building someone's reputation as an industry expert, it would take nothing but a few fake email addresses and speedy responses to the right bloggers to manufacture the impression. I'd start with using HARO to get quoted on a blog that didn't care much about credentials, then use that piece as a marker of authority to justify inclusion in a more reputable publication. It wouldn't take long to be a quote, nationally recognized expert who had been featured in blah, blah, and blah, end quote. The only problem is that it wouldn't be real. Journalists say HARO is a research tool, but it isn't. It is a tool that manufactures self promotion to look like research. Consider alerts like, quote, urgent, email redacted, uh, needs new and little known resources, apps, websites, etc., that offer families unique ways to save money, end quote. Okay, we are back. It, nope. Yes. No. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're back. I don't know where I left off. Um, no idea where I left off. So I'm just gonna pick up where I was reading because I have no without going back a minute back. Okay, thank you. Um, well, I'll start at the top of this page then. Journalists say HARO is a research tool, but it isn't. It is a tool that manufactures self promotion to look like research. Consider alerts like urgent, so and so email, he redacted the email, needs new and little known resources, apps, websites, etc., that offer families unique ways to save money, end quote. This is not a noble effort by a reporter to be educated, but an all too common example of a lazy blogger giving a marketer an opportunity to insert themselves into their story. Journalists also love to put up bulletins asking for resources to support stories they are already writing. Um, Another email needs horror story relating to mortgages, student loans, credit reports, debt collectors, or credit cards. End quote. And then another one, urgent, so and so, email address, is looking for a man who took on a new role around the house after losing his job. End quote. There you have it. Now your bogus trend story sausage is made. In fact, I even saw one Harrow request by a reporter hoping, quote, to speak with an expert about how fads are created, end quote. I hope whoever answered it explained that masturbatory media coverage from people like her has a lot to do with it. While Harrow essentially encourages journalists to look for sources who simply confirm what they are already intending to say, the practice spreads far beyond that singularly bad platform. Instead of researching a topic and communicating their findings to the public, journalists from all sorts of outlets simply grab obligatory but artificial quotes from experts to validate their page view journalism. To the readers, it appears as legitimate news. To the journalists, they were just reverse engineering their story from a search engine friendly premise. An example, in 2015, the New York Times published a story on vaping. The reporter found her sources apparently by sending out the following tweet. Quote, if you're a teen that vapes and want to talk to a reporter twice your age about why you love it, contact, and it's an email, end quote. Um, One of the responders quoted in that popular trend piece later claimed he made up all his answers, including his name. To prove that there is no such thing as irony, the hoaxer admitted all this to Gawker, who just a few days later would post their own trolling, quote, tell us what we want to hear, end quote, call for sources in order to write a piece about BuzzFeed. Even worse was the BBC reporter who tweeted that they were looking for someone to comment on Beyonce's Super Bowl performance. Someone replied recommending that the reporter speak with a fan and tagged someone who might work, but the reporter responded by revealing their true intentions. Quote, I don't want a real fan, just someone who can say it was inappropriate that her performance was political, end quote. Far too many stories are created with this deliberately manipulative mindset. Marketing shills masquerade as legitimate experts, giving advice and commenting on issues in ways that benefit their clients and trick people into buying their products. I constantly receive emails from bloggers and journalists asking me to provide a response to some absurd rumor or speculative analysis. They just need a quote from me denying the rumor, which most people will skip over, to justify publishing it. The agenda has already been set, and the reader is being set up to be fooled. The hit job. A few years ago, I got tired of a speed trap camera near my house and decided to do something about it. Now I could have gone to a public hearing, voiced my objections to these cameras, and hoped that someone in the media might report on it, but that would have left too much up to chance. Instead, I emailed a reporter at the Times-Picayune, the struggling but influential daily newspaper in New Orleans, who I knew had covered this beat before. I explained to him that I was a new resident to the city who had gotten dozens of unfair tickets, including 3 in one day. I emphasized that what an undue financial burden such tickets had been on my girlfriend when she had gotten some herself, and now she's been reduced to tears by a rude city employee when she protested. I sent in a picture of a busted sign near the camera. I played the victim, saying that I felt shaken down as if a bully had taken my lunch money. Now, these things were true, but still, I deliberately framed them in the most sympathetic way. I made it seem like I couldn't afford the tickets. I could, and I was clearly very biased. I was angry and wanted to get back at someone. The result, a week later, a front page story in the Times-Picayune featuring the picture I'd taken and my bully quote in huge block letters, which spurred hundreds of comments and a ton of other coverage. A month later, the city announced it was changing course on the policy, and state legislators debated banning the cameras altogether. Of course, I've also seen it go the other direction. A disgruntled employee can make themselves seem very sympathetic, and reporters rarely ask why this person might be suddenly so eager to talk to them. This is something companies need to be very careful about. I once gave a talk at an association of pork farmers about this very issue. They were tired of being slammed in the press by vegetarians and other animal rights activists. I'm not a supporter of factory farming, but I am empathized with their position. Biased sources were always going to be more sympathetic as sources than big rich farmers ever will be. The same thing was true about the Gawker story I mentioned above. The writer was actively looking for disgruntled ex employees of BuzzFeed to anonymously attack their old company. Forgetting my own bullshit. As I was gathering up press done on me personally over the years, I came across an article I'd forgotten. I'd posted a question on my blog, quote, "What is the classic book of the 80s and 90s?" End quote. It was a discussion I'd had with several friends who were wondering what book teachers would assign to students to learn about this era 50 years from now. This discussion was picked up and featured by Marginal Revolution, a blog by the economist Tyler Cowen, which does about 50,000 page views a day. His post said, quote, oh, and this is fairly long. What is the classic book of the 80s and 90s? By Tyler Cowen on September 3, 2008 at 6:42 p.m. in Books Permalink. I guess I didn't need to read Permalink. That's Ryan Holiday's query. This is not about quality. This is about representing a literary era, or perhaps just representing the era itself. I'll cite Bonfire of the Vanities and Fight Club as the obvious picks. Loyal MR reader Jeff Ritz is thinking of Easton Ellis, though not American Psycho. How about you? Dare I mention John Grisham's The Firm as embodying the blockbuster trend of King, Steele, Clancy, and others? There's always Harry Potter and graphic novels. End quote. So all that was a quote from the title, What Was the Classic Book of the 80s? Coming across this struck me not only because I am a big Tyler Cowen fan, but because I am also Jeff Ritz, or was, since that's one of the fake names I used to use and had apparently emailed my post as a tip to Marginal Revolution. Of course, Jeff Ritz was thinking about Bret Easton Ellis. He's one of my favorite authors. I even answered a variety of that question as me, Ryan Holiday, a few years later for a magazine that was interviewing me. I had been the source of this article and totally forgotten about it. I wanted traffic for my site, so I tricked Tyler and he linked to me. Sorry, Tyler. It paid off too. A blog for the Los Angeles Times picked up the discussion from Cohen's blog and talked positively about 20-something Ryan Holiday, quote unquote. Marginal Revolution is a widely read and influential blog, and I never would have popped up on the Los Angeles Times radar without it. Best of all, now when I write my bio, I get to list the Los Angeles Times as one of the places I've gotten coverage. Score. Okay, we're almost done with this one. How far in are we? 35 minutes. Okay. Why did Jeff Ritz manage to appear as a media source? Why did Ryan Holiday, the guy writing a book on media manipulation, not raise any flags on Harrow? Because no one has time to check these things out. Epstein's line about journalists being wholly dependent on sources was true in 1975, but over 40 years later, bloggers are even more dependent and have even less time for vetting. At the New York Observer, where I am an editorial advisor, it has been exhausting to watch pranksters and liars prey on reporters. In 2015, a marketing agency named Boogie created an April Fool's prank around an app called Shoot, which apparently prevented your iPhone from breaking. The only problem was that they pulled this prank in March. The founder played a convincing character and told a compelling story, which the company then revealed and apologized for after the story ran. A year or so later, another hoax occurred over a Kickstarter campaign for a fake app called Adoptly, essentially Tinder for adoption and fostering. What the Observer writer explained in her piece about falling for the first hoax explains what a tough position reporters are in. Quote, "The Observer regrets our error. We admit we should have spotted a few red flags, like Shoot's limited Twitter following and the fact that Shoot's founder sounded oddly monotone when we interviewed him over the phone. But we must note that unlike several recent media stunts, our story on Shoot was not the product of overly credulous reblogging. Boogie constructed an entire landing page and imaginary founder of the app, replete with screenshots and mock-ups of the product. The Observer interviewed the fictitious founder, played by Boogie's in-house product manager, but he lied over the phone and in his answers to follow-up questions via email." End quote. While there were some red flags, writers don't have time to check all of them. In 1975, a reporter might have had a few days to work on a piece. Now they have a few minutes. There is also a complicated dance between the source and the reporter. A source is interested in seeing the story happen because it's good for their business, and often the blogger is interested in seeing it go the exact same way because their business is publishing stories, not saying no to potential scoops. They suspend disbelief because it's good for business. I like to point out a Gizmodo story where the site fell for a hoax and got 30,000 page views for its poorly researched story headlined "Malfunctioning Cake Ruins Party and Spews Liquor All Over Oil Tycoons." They then followed up after the prank was revealed with a story titled "Viral Video of Shell Oil Pastry Disaster is Fake, Unfortunately," and got 90,000 page views out of it. That's two stories instead of zero, so do you see why they don't question sources? Manipulators and self-promoters, on the other hand, pray this kind of due diligence never happens, and sadly they know it likely won't. And that is finally the end of that chapter, article, whatever. Um, okay. This one's shorter, but not by much. Um, I'm just going to jump straight on into it. So, this is Chapter 6, Tactic 3, Give 'em what spreads. So, we have two quotes to start this one off. Quote, "Study the top stories at Dig and MSN.com and you'll notice a pattern. The top stories all polarize people. If you make it threaten people's three B's, behavior, belief, or belongings, you get a huge virus-like dispersion." That is from Tim Ferriss, #1 New York Times bestselling author. And then the second one is "You and we know that it is generally just the best and most valuable things that do not find their echo immediately." That's by Kurt Wolff, publisher of Franz Kafka. Okay. The advice that MIT Media Studies professor Henry Jenkins gives publishers and companies is blunt. Quote, "If it doesn't spread, it's dead." End quote. The social sharing comes with social sharing comes traffic, and with traffic comes money. Content that isn't shared isn't worth anything. For anyone tasked with advancing narratives in the media, the flip side of this advice is equally straightforward. If it spreads, you're golden. Blogs don't have the resources to advertise their posts, and bloggers certainly don't have the time to work out a publicity launch for something they've written. Every blog publisher and oversharer in your Facebook feed is constantly looking to post things that will take on a life of their own and get attention, links, and new readers with the least work possible. Whether that content is accurate, important, or helpful doesn't even register on their list of priorities. If the quality of their content doesn't matter to bloggers, do you think it's going to matter to marketers? It's never mattered to me, so I design what I sell to bloggers based on what I know and they think will spread. I give them what they think will go viral online and make them money. A Tale of Two City slideshows. If you're like me, you've sat and stared in fascination at the pictures of the ruins of Detroit that get passed around the internet. We've all gaped at the stunning shots of the cave like interior of the decaying United Artists Theater and the towering Michigan Central Station that resembles an abandoned Gothic cathedral. These beautiful, high res photo slideshows are impressive pieces of online photojournalism, or so you think. Like everyone else, I ate up these slideshows, and I even harbored a guilty desire to go to Detroit and walk through the ruins. My friends know this and send me the newest ones as soon as they come out. When I see the photos, I can't help thinking of this line from Fight Club. Quote, in the world I see, you're stalking elk through the damp canyon forests around the ruins of Rockefeller Center. You'll climb the wrist-thick kudzu vines that wrap the Sears Tower, and when you look down, you'll see tiny figures pounding corn, laying strips of venison on the empty carpool lane of some abandoned superhighway. End quote. To see a broken, abandoned American city is a moving, nearly spiritual experience, one you are immediately provoked to share with everyone you know. A slideshow that generates a reaction like this is online gold. An ordinary blog post is only one page long, so a 1,000-word article about Detroit would get one page view per viewer. A slideshow about Detroit gets 20 per user, hundreds of thousands of times over, while premium advertising rates are charged against the photos. A recent 20-picture display posted by the Huffington Post was commented on more than 4,000 times and liked 25,000 times on Facebook, and that was the second time they'd posted it. The New York Times website has two of their own, for a total of 23 photos. The Guardian's website has a 16-pager. Time.com's 11-pager is the top Google result for Detroit photos. We're talking about millions of views combined. One would think that any photo of Detroit would be an instant hit online. Not so. A series of beautiful but sad photographs of foreclosed and crumbling Detroit houses and their haggard residents was posted on Magnum Photos' site in 2009, well before most of the others. It shows the same architectural devastation, the same poverty and decline. While the slideshow in the Huffington Post received 4,000 comments within days, these photos got 21 comments over 2 years. One spreads, the other doesn't. In an article in the New Republic called The Case Against Economic Disaster Porn, Noreen Malone points out that one thing stands out about the incredibly viral photographs of Detroit. Not a single one of the popular photos of the ruins of Detroit has a person in it. That was the difference between the Huffington Post slideshows and the Magnum photos. Magnum dared to include human beings in their photos of Detroit. The photos that spread, on the other hand, are deliberately devoid of any sign of life. Detroit has a homeless population of nearly 20,000, and in 2011, city funding for homeless shelters was cut in half. Thousands more live in foreclosed houses and buildings without electricity or heat. The very same structures in the pictures. These photos don't just omit people. Detroit is a city overrun by stray dogs, which roam the streets roam the city in packs hunting and scavenging for food. Conservative figures estimate that there are as many as 50,000 wild dogs living in Detroit and something like 650,000 feral cats. In other words, you can't walk a block in Detroit without seeing heartbreaking and deeply wounded signs of life. You'd have to try not to. And that's exactly what these slideshow photographers do. Why? Because all that is depressing. As Jonah Peretti, the virality expert behind both the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed, believes, quote, if something is a total bummer, people don't share it, end quote. And since people don't share it, blogs won't publish it. Seeing the homeless and the drug addicts and starving, dying animals would take away all the fun. It'd make the viewers feel uncomfortable, and unsettling images are not conducive to sharing. Why, Peretti asks, would anyone, bloggers or readers, want to pass along bad feelings? The economics of the web make it impossible to portray the complex situation in Detroit accurately. It turns out that photos of Detroit that spread do so precisely because they are dead. Simple narratives like the haunting ruins of a city spread and live, while complicated ones like a city filled with real people who desperately need help don't. One city, two possible portrayals. One is a bummer, one looks cool. Only one makes it into the Huffington Post slideshow. My point here is not sociological so much as it is practical. Let me explain how this ends up affecting companies and public figures. Say someone accuses you of something horrible. Obviously, those salacious allegations make for good copy. The problem is that the truth, your response, is often much less interesting than the accusations. Getting caught stepping out on a spouse might generate headlines. The fact that the marriage was long over, that you were both just waiting for the paperwork to be finished, and in fact the spouse has moved on too, that's starting to involve a lot of variables. It's complicated, it's boring. No one is getting excited to share that. This is something I have to explain to clients in crisis PR situations all the time. I say, quote, look, if your response isn't more interesting than the allegations, no one is going to care. You might as well not bother, end quote. So a lot of times people end up having to take a lot of untrue crap because they don't have much recourse with a media that cares more about what spreads than what is accurate. Or worse, you get an escalation. Someone accuses someone of something. The person has to respond that it's all made up and the person is only doing it because insert a different lie, and it just goes round and round and round. Extreme versions of reality. Look at a slideshow of Detroit and you might think the world is ending. Look at some headlines on Upworthy.com and you might be forgiven for thinking that the world is doing awesome. Because just as extreme negativity is one effective technique, so is cloying and saccharine positivity. Check out these headlines that did millions of views. Quote, watch a preacher attack gay marriage and totally change his mind on the spot. End quote. Quote, a message to everyone out there who thinks they aren't beautiful in pictures. End quote. Quote, she tried to kill herself and it didn't work. See how she made all that into something beautiful. End quote. Quote, she didn't think the love of her life was romantic enough. Then she looked out her office window. End quote. Quote, move over, Barbie, you're obsolete. End quote. If only the world were actually this way. Indeed, the site's editors know that it is not. But folks at Upworthy are filtering and exclusively delivering only a small sliver of reality, one that is all sweet and no sweat. Even Upworthy's pop-up message, designed to snag emails, is illustrative of this approach. Quote, it's nice to be reminded of the good in the world, and it should happen more often. End quote. Then you give them your email address and they begin to bombard you with reminders. On the opposite end of the spectrum, much of the media is obsessed with what might be called outrage porn. Here are a few headlines from Salon.com to prove my point. Okay, a bunch more quotes in a row here. Quote, Patton Oswalt makes Asian name joke in response to racist KTVU news report, end quote. Quote, another Portuguese water dog, the Obamas should have made a different statement, end quote. Quote, the Onion thinks incest statutory rape is hilarious, end quote. Quote, Gawker's privilege tournament is all about white anger, end quote. And finally, quote, The Conjuring, right-wing, woman-hating, and really scary, end quote. Is the world terrible or is it awesome? Can't these people just make up their minds? The press, Martin Amis once noted, quote, is more vicious than the populace, end quote. It's also more positive and gushy, as Upworthy is, than normal people. Why? Because it's paid to be. In 2010, Jonah Berger, an expert on virality at the Wharton School, looked at 7,000 articles that made it onto the New York Times most emailed list. A story from the Times is shared on Twitter once every 4 seconds, making the list one of the biggest media platforms on the web. The researchers' results confirm almost everything we see when content like the sensational ruin porn of Detroit goes viral. For me, it confirmed every intuition behind my manipulations. According to the study, quote, the most powerful predictor of virality is how much anger an article evokes, end quote. I will say it again, the most powerful predictor of what spreads online is anger. Is it any surprise that there is so much anger-provoking content online then? No wonder the outrage is created for Tucker's movie that oh sorry no wonder the outrage I created for Tucker's movie worked so well. According to Berger's study, anger has such a profound effect that one standard deviation increase in the anger rating of an article is the equivalent of spending an additional 3 hours as the lead story on the front page of NewYorkTimes.com. Again, extremes in any direction have a large impact on how something will spread. But certain emotions do better than others. For instance, an equal shift in the positivity of an article is the equivalent of spending about 1.2 hours as the lead story. It's a significant but clear difference. The angrier an article makes the reader, the better, but happy works too. The researchers found that while sadness is an extreme emotion, it is a wholly unviral one. Sadness, like what one might feel to see a stray dog shivering for warmth or a homeless man begging for money, is typically a low arousal emotion. Sadness depresses our impulse for social sharing. It's why nobody wanted to share the Magnum photos, but everybody gladly shared the ones on the Huffington Post. The HuffPo photos were awesome. They made us angry as they surprised us. Such emotions triggered a desire to act. They are arousing, and that is exactly the reaction a publisher hopes to exploit. Pe- quote, people get viral content wrong, end quote. Eli Perisser, the founder of Upworthy, told Business Week, quote, they imagine that the reason people share stuff is to have a laugh, but a huge part of sharing is being passionate about something, about shedding light on what really matters, end quote. In turn, it's what marketers exploit as well. A powerful predictor of whether content will spread online is valence, or the degree of positive or negative emotion a person is made to feel. Both extremes are more desirable than anything in the middle. Regardless of the topic, the more an article makes someone feel good or bad, the more likely it is to make the most emailed list. I want to take things that people are passionate about and connect them to my products or clients to get people worked about them, to get them talking. No smart marketer is ever going to push a story with the stink of reasonableness, complexity, or mixed emotions. We want to rile people up. We want to provoke you into talking. The problem is that facts are rarely clearly good or bad. They just are. The truth is also boring and complicated. Navigating this quandary forces marketers and publishers to conspire to distort this information into something that will register on the emotional spectrum of the audience, to turn it into something that spreads and to drive clicks. Behind the scenes, I work to crank up the valence of articles, relying on scandal, conflict, triviality, titillation, and dogmatism, whatever will ensure transmission. The press is often in the evil position of needing to go negative and play tricks with your psyche in order to drive you to share their material online. For instance, in studies where subjects are shown negative video footage, war, an airplane crash, an execution, a natural disaster, they become more aroused, can better recall what happened, pay more attention, and engage more cognitive resources to consume the media than non negative footage. That's the kind of stuff that will make you hit share this. They push your buttons so you'll press theirs. Things must be negative, but not too negative. Hopelessness, despair, these drive us to do nothing. Pity, empathy, those drive us to do something, like get up from our computers to act. But anger, fear, excitement, laughter, and outrage, these drive us to spread. They drive us to do something that makes us feel as if we are doing something, when in reality, we are only contributing to what is probably a superficial and utterly meaningless conversation. Online games and apps operate on the same principle and exploit the same impulses. Be consuming without frustrating, manipulative without revealing the strings. For those who know what levers provoke people to share, media manipulation becomes simply a matter of packaging and presentation. All it takes is the right frame, the right angle, the millions of readers will willingly send your idea or image or ad to their friends, family, and coworkers on your behalf. Bloggers know this and want it badly. If I can hand them a story that may be able to deliver, who are they to refuse? Giving the bastards what they want. When I designed online ads for American Apparel, I almost always looked for an angle that would provoke. Outrage, self-righteousness, and titillation all worked equally well. Naturally, the sexy ones are probably those who you remember most, but the formula worked for all types of images. Photos of kids dressed up like adults, dogs wearing clothes, a copy that didn't make any sense, all high-valence viral images. If I could generate a reaction, I could propel the ad from being something I had to pay for people to see by buying an ad inventory to something people would gladly post on the front page of their highly trafficked websites. I once ran a series of completely nude, not safe for work or NSFW advertisements featuring the porn star Sasha Grey on two blogs. They were very small websites, and the total cost of the ads was only $1,200. A naked woman with visible pubic hair and a major U.S. retailer plus a major U.S. retailer plus blogs equals massive online story. The ads were picked up online by Nerve, BuzzFeed, Fast Company, Jezebel, Refinery 29, NBC New York, Fleshbot, and the Portland Mercury, and many others. They eventually made it into print as far away as Rolling Stone, Brazil, and they're still being passed around online. The idea wasn't ever to sell product directly through the ads themselves, since the model wasn't really wearing any of it, and the sites were too small anyway. I knew that just the notion of a company running pornographic advertisements on legitimate blogs would be too arousing, no pun intended, for share hungry sites and readers to resist. I'm not sure if I was the first person to ever do this, but I certainly told reporters I was. Some blogs wrote about it in anger, some wrote about it in disgust, and others loved it and wanted more. The important part was that they wrote about it at all. I ended up be It ended up being seen millions of times, and almost none of those views were on the original site where we paid for the ads to run. I wasn't trying to create controversy for the sake of controversy. The publicity from the spectacle generated tens of thousands of dollars in sales, and that was my intention all along. I had substantial data to back up the fact that chatter correlated with a spike in purchases of whatever product was the subject of the conversation. Armed with this information, I made it my strategy to manufacture chatter by exploiting emotions of high valence, arousal, and indignation. I'd serve ads in direct violation of the standards of publishers and ad networks, knowing that while they'd inevitably be pulled, the ads would generate all sorts of brand awareness in the few minutes users saw them. A slight slap on the wrist or pissing off some prudes was a penalty well worth paying for all the attention and money we got. In the case of American Apparel, this leveraged advertising strategy I developed was responsible for taking online sales from 40 million to nearly 60 million in 3 years with a minuscule ad budget. Hidden consequences. I use these tactics to sell products and they work. Lots of products get sold, but I have come to know that the act of constantly provoking and fooling people has a larger cost, nor am I the only one doing it. You probably don't remember what happened on February 19th, 2009, and that's because nothing notable happened, at least by any normal standard. But to those who make their livings by what spreads, it was an incredibly lucrative day, and for our country, it was a costly one. During what was supposed to be a standard on camera segment, CNBC correspondent Rick Santelli had a somewhat awkward meltdown on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. He went off script and started ranting about the Obama administration and the then recently passed stimulus bill. Then he started yelling about homeowners who bit off bigger mortgages than they could chew, and Cuba, and a bunch of other ridiculous stuff. Traders on the floor began to cheer and jeer, and he ended by declaring that he was thinking about having a Chicago Tea Party to dump derivatives into Lake Michigan. The whole thing looked like a shit show. CNBC was smart. They recognized from the reaction of their anchors, which ranged from horror to mild bemusement, that they had something valuable on their hands. Instead of waiting for the video to be discovered by bloggers, news junkies, message boards, and mashup artists, CNBC posted it on their own website immediately. While this might seem like a strange move for a serious media outlet to make, it wasn't. The Drudge Report linked to the clip, and it immediately blew up. This was, as Rob Walker wrote for The Atlantic in an analysis of the event, a core principle of our new viral culture. Quote, humiliation should not be suppressed. It should be monetized. End quote. Instead of being ashamed of its crappy television journalism, CNBC was able to make extra money from the millions of views it generated. The real reason that Santelli clip spread so quickly was a special part of toying with the balance of the website. Originally, the clip spread as a joke, with the degree of amusement being determined by where the viewers fit on the political spectrum. But where some saw a joke, others saw a truth teller. An actual Chicago Tea Party was organized. Disaffected voters genuinely agreed with what he had said. Santelli wasn't having a meltdown. Some thought he was just as angry as they were. On the other end of the spectrum, not only were people not laughing, they were horribly offended. To them, this was proof of CNBC's political bias. Some were so serious that they endorsed a conspiracy theory launched by a blog on Playboy.com, of all places, that alleged the meltdown was a deliberately planned hoax funded by conservative billionaires to energize the right wing. Regardless of how they interpreted Santelli's rant, everyone's reactions were so extreme that few of them were able to see it for what it truly was, a mildly awkward news segment that should have been forgotten. Of all the political and financial narratives we needed in 2009, this was surely not it. Reasoned critiques of leveraged capitalism, solutions that required sacrifice, these were things that did not yield exciting blog posts or spread well online, but the Santelli clip did. CNBC fell ass first into the perfect storm of what spreads on the web: humiliation, conspiracy theories, anger, frustration, humor, passion, and possibly the interplay of several or all of these things together. And then, as if this weren't enough, the whole absurd charade happened again in 2015 and 2016 with the rise of the pro-Trump faction of the Republican Party. It's almost as if the insatiable media appetite for stories that will make people angry and outraged has created a market for anger and outrage. No shit. It's almost as if that's why we're so divided and upset. Oh wait, that is why. As Chris Hedges, the philosopher and journalist, wrote, quote, "In an age of images and entertainment, in an age of instant emotional gratification, we neither seek nor want honesty or reality. Reality is complicated. Reality is boring. We are incapable or unwilling to handle its confusion." End quote. As a manipulator, I certainly encourage and fuel this age. So do the content creators. The media don't really know how they come off as long as they can sell ads. Oh, sorry, don't really care how they come off as long as they sell ads against the traffic they generate. And the audience says they're okay with it too, voting clearly with their clicks. We're all feeding that monster. This may seem like nothing, but it's just people having fun, right? Sure, my deliberately provocative ads, once caught, quickly do disappear and awareness subsides, just like all viral web content. Roughly 96% of the 7,000 articles that made the most emailed list in the New York Times study did so only once. In almost no cases did any article make the list, drop off, and then return. They had a brief transitory existence and then disappeared. But though viral content may disappear, its consequences do not, be it a toxic political party or an addiction to cheap and easy attention. The omission of humanity from the popular slideshows of Detroit is not a malicious choice, nor is it the injection of pseudo positivity into viral stories on other sites. There was no person like me behind the scenes hoping to mislead you. There was no censorship or overt manipulation in most cases. In fact, there are thousands of the other, more realistic photos out there. Yet, all the same, the public is misinformed about a situation that we desperately need to solve. Through the selective mechanism of what spreads and gets traffic and page views, we get suppression, not by omission, but by transmission. The web has only one currency, and you can use any word you want for it: valence, extremes, arousal, powerfulness, excitement, but it adds up to false perception, which is great if you're a publisher, but not if you're someone who cares about the people in Detroit, or you're someone who wants to find common ground with their neighbors. What thrives online is not the writing that reflects anything close to the reality in which you and I live, nor does it allow for the kind of change that will create the world we wish to live in. It does, however, make it possible for me to do what I do, and people like me will keep doing it as long as that is true. And that is the end of the second article for tonight. And thankfully, because my voice is going. So that puts us into Tactic 4, which is Chapter 7 next time. I'll read Chapter 7 and 8 on Friday. And this tactic is help them trick their readers. So we're about a third of the way through the book, it looks like, roughly, just guessing from where the... It's an interesting read. Not sure how I feel about it just yet, but it is an interesting read. So anyway, let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna. Oh, wait. Nah, I'm just gonna call it. I will just see you all in the next reading, which could be tomorrow or Thursday, but most definitely Friday. All right. Have a good one.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes. Wonder where I might find some peace.